Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anshita Thakur, fifth year learner at Symbiosis Law School, Noida, and vice curator at the Third Indian Law Conclave. I welcome you all on behalf of Team ILC for this session on labor rights vis-a-vis ease of doing business. Labor laws exist to ensure socio-economic justice of the workforce. These laws regulate wages, conditions of work, labor policies, and other rights related to laborers. The clash between economic growth and labor laws arises since compromising the rights and wages of laborers is a mechanism that has been historically adopted by industrialists to cut costs and to increase their profit margins. In today's session, we will discuss in detail this incompatibility between upholding labor rights while at the same time addressing ease of doing business concerns. For this session, we have been graced by some remarkable professionals. We have with us Ms. Anjali Jain, who heads the Insolvency and Corporate Laws practice as well as the Legal Research Division at the law firm Arnis. Dr. Neeti Shikha Mam, who is currently serving as the head Center for Insolvency and Bankruptcy at the Indian Institute of Corporate Affairs. Mr. Prashant Bhushan, a renowned public interest lawyer in the Supreme Court of India. And finally, we have Mr. Robin Banerjee, who is Managing Director of Caprians India Limited with CA, CS, and MCOM qualifications and has served in senior leadership positions in several multinational global corporations. You can refer to our delegate handbook for detailed information of all the speakers. Sir and ma'am, it is an honor to have you with us. The session will begin with each of the speakers giving an introductory remark on the topic in about 5 to 7 minutes. We will then proceed with the questionnaire that has been prepared by the team. And finally, we will pick up questions by the delegates. If the delegates have any questions during the session, then they can type it out in the chat box. I request Ms. Anjali Jain to commence the session with her introductory remarks. Ma'am, we're moving in a alphabetical order, if that's all right.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm so extremely humbled and honored to share the platform with such eminent personalities. And also, I would like to take a moment to extend my thanks to the organizing committee of the Indian Law Conclave, who's been able to organize this big event in these tough times. So let's just quickly venture into the labor rights and the ease of doing business. See, ease of doing business is not just about seamless starts or less cumbersome journeys or resolving insolvencies. It definitely includes regulating employment. And as we all know, doing business rankings, India has improved by 14 points. But the interesting point to note is this, that in its last year ranking, the regulating employment indicator has been specifically excluded. So till date, all the labor reforms, they have got no relevance in the ease of business doing ranking improvements in the World Bank. So these rankings are basically meant to motivate international investments in any country. And now India strive to become among the top 50s in these rankings. And that is why we have introduced 4 new labor codes. So that is now consolidating good 40 central laws. So being a legal professional, I can relate to the sentimental gaps of both the management as well as the laborers. See, the management, they're very reluctant to hire more and more employees because of the fact they will have to go for more regulations and compliances. So it is it is disincentivizing the labor intensive industries. And on the same hand, laborers, they are not really happy with the labor regime because of the social securities. They're not provided any kind of social securities. So I think government is trying to take care of both these regimes, both like management and the laborers interest in these codes. Let's just quickly analyze what is there, what the provisions are there in these 4 labor codes. So if I talk about the pro labor provisions, the core pro labor provisions, then of course what I find the most exciting thing is in relation to the introduction of national floor wage system, which will ensure the timely payment of wages to everyone around there. And also earlier only 30%, around good only 30% of the laborers were included, but now it is extended to almost good percentage of workers. And also it will ensure the reduction in the regional disparities. And another thing is we have there is now a uniformity in the concepts and definitions, like workers, definition of workers, definition of interstate migrant workers, or industrial disputes. So there is now uniformity in all the concepts and definitions, which will ensure the proper enforcement of these codes. Third, what I find it interesting in this is this, there are certain welfare benefit schemes like, maternity benefits or employment or education or disability. So all these benefits, they will now be extended to the unorganized sector. There are certain things, like platform workers, gig workers, there's certainly extended social security benefits for the first time ever in the history in the world. So, like this is the gig which the world can take care, like, learn from India. Like all the social security benefits are extended to unorganized sector. So if I talk about the pro business provisions, so pro business provision is definitely is first is, like there has been ease of compliances, and then all the processes have been completely digitized. You have to find single return, like, return come challan is there for EPFO, ESICs. There's some like unified portal is there. So all these compliances are now put at ease. Secondly, there is, like a relaxation in the threshold. The threshold limits, they have now been relaxed, like from 100 to 300 for particular purposes, like, for making layoffs, for retrenchments, or for making shut-offs. Earlier, you have to approve to the, like get the government approvals for the same. But now you don't have to go for, if you fall below the exempted, like within the exempted limit of the threshold. So this is, like labor intensive industries are definitely going to get the benefit out of it. Secondly, like all the disclosures in relation to non-compliances, they have now been decriminalized. Like all the rules are now made flexible enough. So now we're trying to, like make our rules quite flexible to ensure that we stand in par with UK, US labor law rules. Because, flexibility is one thing, flexibility and ease in compliance is one thing, which will definitely ensure management to engage more and more laborers. So also inspector our system, I think this is definitely taken care of in this fact, and we have a centralized portal for that. It is going to come soon. So specific exemptions are also provided to MSMEs and startups to aid the ease of doing business. Self-certification schemes are provided. So I think there's a balance between the two, like pro labor and pro business. Definitely, we are going to face some challenges in relation to the fact that, for example, monitoring mechanism, regulatory effective mechanisms are not there in place. Also, laborers are feeling that, that the all the companies, all the establishments who are below the threshold, they will be exploited by them, and management is feeling that the cost per employee is high. So we'll see, we can definitely take care of these concerns. But yeah, overall what I want to say is that there's a perfect balance between the two. Growth oriented approach is taken, like for instance, like if there is a flexibility provided to the management to engage with the contract laborers, with the platform workers, to the gig workers. At the same time, all these unorganized workers, they are ensured that they get all kinds of social security benefits. They get gratuity, PF. So, there's a legitimization of all the
Yes.
unorganized workers, right? And secondly, also, like if you say, like generally it is also criticized for this fact that, below the threshold limit, flexibility is provided to the management to regulate employment. But, I think that is perfectly taken care of by the fact that, you have the reskilling centers or the career placements or the expos, which are definitely going to give you an edge and, definitely get you reabsorbed back into the working ecosystem. So I think there's a perfect balance between the two, and we
Okay.
are, going to be the preferred investment
Okay.
destination in the country.
Okay. Thank you for that, ma'am. That was a very good, comprehensive brief of the topic. Miss Neeti Shikha, ma'am, would you like to grace us with your introductory remarks?
Uh, Thank you. First of all, let me thank Alexis and ILC for inviting me. I think this is my third year, continuous year with them. And
Okay.
special thanks to Aditya, whose leadership has encouraged me personally. And I see he's being, he has steered this whole students movement towards right direction. So congratulations, Aditya. May your tribe increase. And it's truly an honor to be on a panel of such eminent people. And honestly, I'm not sure what I'll be able to add, given that Sri Bhushan and Sri Banerjee and Anjali is here. But let me begin saying that, in India, we have too many laws and very less justice. And one of the reason is because, India is burdened with over legislations. For every small thing, there's a legislation in place. So I think the first thing which was imperative as a country is to do away with laws which were redundant, which were obsolete. And I would like to mention in this regard that Center for Civil Society, on a think tank on which I happen to be as a board of advisor, we did study, there's a project called Repeal of Laws, and we carried out studies in various states, and we identified there's so many laws which are redundant and still exist in statute book. Now, if you think from a business person's perspective, a business person is totally confused as to, where to look for what are compliances, right? So taken from that standpoint, I think the government has done a very good job by codifying various statutes, as Anjali also mentioned, into 4 different codes, right? So you don't have to, it's not like a sea of law where you're looking for, you're looking for an answer, but you know exactly the certain place they look for. There's so many laws which were redundant, which was legacy of colonialism. And I think it is a very right move in that direction. The second point I'd like to drive regarding the labor reforms is, that you have to really appreciate the current government, that it has totally eschewed the socialist approach that we had towards business and commerce. It's no secret that for 40 years we have carried out this legacy of socialism, which was read within the commercial statutes. And if you see India, despite being a manufacturing hub, the contribution to overall GDP is still very, very, very skewed. So from that standpoint, I think, again, government has done a very good job, because it's sort of revamping the whole ecosystem and ensuring that commercial laws are read with, with market as in, as an interest and as a center. So this is, again, something which one has to appreciate. And many people have criticized that the current reforms that government has brought is very pro-market and anti-people. I think this is, again, something which we always carried, as a bias that we carry towards liberal approaches to reforms. We say that, liberal approaches is anti-people, but there are multiple evidences which I think during the course of discussion I'd like to give you, that, it is not so. And, you have plethora of examples where countries had minimum wages, where, the unemployment rate has gone up to 27%. For example, if you look at Belgium, you look at Netherlands and UK. And likewise, if you contrast it with the countries where you have no minimum wages like Germany, and employment has sort of stayed around 5.2%. Unemployment rate has stayed around 5.2%. So from that perspective, I think that, these sort of market-oriented reforms are good. And I'm also reminded of an interesting study that I think Sean Doherty had done when he was visiting at NIPFP in India. And in that study, he found that stricter labor laws, stricter the employment laws or labor laws, the cost of compliance is higher, and hence that really disturbs the supply and demand. So studies have actually shown that the not just it is anti-market and anti-business when the laws are stricter, but also the unit of per labor increases when when the laws are stricter and very conservative. So that ways, I think, again, reforms are very good. Of course, we have concerns about the welfare of the workers. And from that perspective, you see the government have sort of ensured that the social security of workers are well protected, because unlike before, now they'll be part of, security funds. And it gives a lot of, leeway for companies to think around their securities. And I think it will not just propel the labor and manufacturing market, but also maybe newer insurance products and schemes could come for these laborers. So if you see overall as an economy, it will really trigger the engine of growth. And the last point I think I'd like to submit is that the reforms are definitely a step towards right direction. And I will not go into the details of discussing what the reforms are. Of course, during the course of conversation, we could touch upon a few. But I think this is a good vision. I still remember 2019 economic survey report where the CEA has clearly said that we have to think of new ways of creation of wealth, right? And he talked about public trust, trust as a public good. I think what we need to do is build up trust in our economic system, and if we could build up trust, and if you believe in market forces, I think this is high time that India sorts of revamps and totally relooks into its labor market or industry as a whole, if I can say so. And the last point I'd like to submit today to you is that, we have seen that in past few years, since coming of IBC, India has taken a leap in ease of doing business ranking. Now, if you look at ease of doing business report, there are few places that India really lacks. Of course, one is contract enforcement, and I think it'll take some time to make sure that the courts and the whole ecosystem, the commercial ecosystem, starts appreciating and creates a friendly environment for contract enforcement. The other place that India has ranked very low is on labor reforms, right? Because they have seen that labor laws in India is very anti-business. So I think, of course, the devil lies in details as to how you balance the interest of labor and market, labor and business. But I'm pretty certain that the reforms will definitely yield good results and will ensure that India takes more leap in ease doing business ranking. And it'll also attract a lot of foreign investors who would like to come to India, to set up the manufacturing units. With that, I think I would pass back, the floor to you. Thank you, Ishita.
Very interesting inputs. Mr. Prashant Bhushan, sir, as a PIL litigant, we would love to hear your introductory remarks on the subject.
So thank you very much for inviting me for this session on labor laws versus ease of doing business. I must confess at the very outset that I am not an expert on this subject, and I have not yet been able to study these four codes that have come in any great detail. I just have a sort of reasonable understanding of what has been done. But with these limitations, I'll say what I feel about all this. So firstly, labor rights have been created primarily to ensure that the labor, which is always sort of the weaker party of the two between the employer and the labor, is not exploited, that they are allowed to have some reasonable minimum wages, reasonable conditions of work, reasonable social security, etc. And that is why these various laws were made in order to ensure that the employers are forced by law to provide these minimum things to the labor. Of course, what had happened over the years was that there were too many laws, too many rules, too many inspectors, and therefore it became very draconian and very difficult for employers, even honest employers who did not want to exploit their labor, to comply with all these rules and laws, etc. And therefore it was required that they should be simplified. Because obviously you should not create a regime where, by way of trying to protect labor rights, you create a system by which employers are discouraged from employing labor and discouraged from setting up industry, because that's counterproductive. That acts against the very labor whom you are trying to protect. And that is why this reform of at least simplifying the laws and making them easier to comply with by honest employers who were not wanting to exploit the labor was certainly required. So to that extent, part of the exercise of trying to simplify all the acts and put them together in four codes is a welcome step. But unfortunately, these codes themselves are so detailed and so long that again, it may, I don't think they achieve fully, at least, the object of simplifying these rules and laws, etc. But I think to the extent that um, uh, the some of the rules or some of the unnecessary things which employers were asked to comply with in the earlier laws have been done away with, and even to the extent that government inspectors have been replaced by certified inspectors, etc. I think that is also a welcome step. Now, so far as one particular change that has been made is to increase the number of workers for the purpose of uh, taking government permission for retrenchment from 100 to 300. I think that is also a welcome step because, in fact, in my view, government permission should not be required for retrenchment in any industry. That is my personal view. I believe minimum wages have not been disturbed, but I feel that minimum wages should have been extended even to domestic workers who have been kept outside these codes. Because it's high time that even domestic workers are at least entitled to minimum wages and also to certain conditions of work, because domestic workers are perhaps among the most exploited workers in the country. The the new codes have allowed the employers to employ contract labor and to have workers on contract. Even though I believe that the new code requires that the contract labor should be paid the same wages as regular workers who are doing the same work. I feel that for at least the Contract Labor Act required that for jobs which are perennial in nature, you should not employ contract workers and you should have regular workers. And I think there was no reason to do away with that because today there is this rampant practice of just employing contract labor for everything. And despite the existence of that law, which prohibited the employment of contract labor for perennial jobs, that practice is still rampant and it has not been stopped. I believe that the requirement and the need was to ensure that this kind of employment of contract labor for perennial jobs is not resorted to normally. And for that, stricter enforcement should have been brought, but that has not been brought. One important thing, you see, in order to enforce any rights of anybody, including labor, you need to have a proper redressal system. And for that, you need to have a proper system of labor courts or whatever courts which are easily accessible and which can decide matters quickly. Now, unfortunately, the new code has far from making that effective because even today, we find that labor has to struggle endlessly in order to enforce their rights through the existing system of labor courts, etc. It takes them years and years, and it's a kind of losing battle for them because they don't have the wherewithal to fight that battle through the courts, while the employers do have that wherewithal. So the need of the hour was to strengthen that system, to have more effective courts which decide quickly, to have more courts which decide these matters quickly. Instead of that, we see that a reversal of that has been done by way of abolishing district courts and having only courts at the state level or some kind of tribunals, labor tribunals at the state level. So this is a very retrograde thing which will effectively lead to non-enforcement of whatever rights that have been given to the labor. So this is, to my mind, a very, very critical shortcoming of the new labor codes that have been made. So those are a few things that I wanted to say. But as I said, you see, I'm not an expert in this field, and I have not yet been able to study all these codes properly, which are, as I said, themselves quite lengthy and quite detailed. For me to offer any more detailed comments on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Mr. Robin Manner-Reeser, would you like to give us your introductory remarks?
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. To succeed in speaking Prashant Bhushan Saab is almost an impossibility, but I'll still try to do that. Thank you, sir. Wonderful remarks you made, and thank you, all of you. It's easy to be the last speaker in a way, because all that what's supposed to be spoken has spoken. Therefore, I'll take a little different tack. Our subject is labor rights and EODB, which is ease of doing business. I'll first take the quick word, what is ease of doing business? Ease of doing business is normally known as better infrastructure, better roads, better railways, better telephone lines, telecommunications. That's not so. Ease of doing business is all about the permissions for anyone to take to start and run a business. One or two exceptions are, it also includes enforcing contracts, taxation laws, inter-border, inter-country transactions, and of course, how fast you get an electricity permission or a forest clearances and so on and so forth. So basically, it's all about permissions. There is something else called competitiveness index. Competitiveness index is also ranked. India ranks about 43, 44 on that. Ease of doing business, we rank about 63. We have moved up the ladder by about 14 ranks in the last 1 year. Competitiveness of business is all about infrastructure. And there, Singapore is #1, just for information. So we are talking about EODB, ease of doing business. In ease of doing business is all about permissions and ability to continue and start a new business. Whenever you talk about business, there are 4 factors of production, which I think most of us have read in the world from our childhood. Land, labor, capital, organization. These are the 4 factors of production. Land, the payment of land is rent. Payment of labor is wages. Payment for capital is interest. And payment for organization is profit. And when we talk about EODB, we talk about land, labor, capital, organization, and we also talk about this whole concept of the rental, wages, interest, and profits. Unless these 8 factors of production, the factors of production, the payment thereof is looked in a holistic manner, EODB cannot be discussed. Now, labor is a second factor of production in this ball game. And labor, we are talking about labor rights. I feel humbly, after all this, all the famous speakers, that labor right is not about labor wages. Labor right primarily means a right to get employed. Right to get employed is a labor right. If every labor has a right to get employed. Of course, once you get the right to get employed, there also has to be a fair wages, fair salary, fair remuneration, and you should have an ecosystem of safety and let's say, safety and good environment of where you will work. Now, how do you get, the primary thing is right to get employment, and that's where the country is suffering from. The people don't have jobs. We can get a better employment provided we encourage businesses to start running and businesses start growing. And that ecosystem can start if you have a better ease of doing business. The more you ease of doing business, more you start manufacturing or services and commercial activities, more employment starts. The labor code, which has just come in, I think, adds one thing for the entrepreneur community. It adds the concept of hire and fire. That's what it brings in. Why does an employer does not want to employ? There is an entry policy of taking a labor, but there is no exit policy. If my company doesn't do well, my businesses doesn't do well, I can't sack people. But unless that happens, why do I employ anybody at all? So the fixed term employment contractual opportunity, the contract labor employment, which is now brought into the labor code, is a single concept of, to my mind, the EODB. That is, you are more flexible, you can have fixed term employment, and the fact that there is EODB going around, more manufacturing should come in. I personally believe that labor right, which is more importantly, the ability to get employed, and of course at a fair remuneration, will greatly be helped if, if the EODB continues to grow. And although in the EODB ranking, there are 10 parameters in which labor is not one of them because it is decided by the World Bank or IMF, but the government has rightly taken labor, although it is not part of the 10 parameters, to solve that unless labor is solved, land labor capital organization, labor is solved, the country cannot have an ease of doing business. So I think these two are complementary, and a wonderful job has happened or is going on, in my view, in making the ecosystem more labor friendly and better for them. Thank you.
Thank you. So that was a very wonderful perspective from the industry. Now, I would like to begin with the questionnaire. So the first question is with regard to the 4 new labor codes that the government is seeking to implement. Now, all 4 speakers have mentioned this, and every speaker did agree on the fact that there was a need for codification in the first place. But till what extent has the new labor law codes been able to fulfill this objective of ensuring socioeconomic justice? Now, Prashant sir did observe some shortcomings of the new laws, but could the speakers give a more detailed discussion on what the shortcomings are? And there has been some discussed content that has been expressed by trade unions against this law. So is there a need for such apprehensions, and what can be done to address those apprehensions? Anjali ma'am.
So basically, what I think, like in respect of socio-economic justice, the law has definitely taken care of this fact. If you think trade unions have, expressed their disconcern because of, I think it must be the fact that, there are certain industries which are below the threshold limit. So they are, like they are expressing their disconcern that labor exploitation can happen in those industries because threshold has now been raised, right? But now what threshold is required for any business because of the fact because you need to breathe, you need to take greater risk and greater challenges in life. For that, businesses need a space to breathe basically. So if thresholds are raised, it should not be matter of concern for the trade unions, because at the same time I've already mentioned that perfect ecosystem is created for them. Reskilling centers are there, career places are there, they can go there and accordingly get perfectly absorbed in the working ecosystem. So I think this is one of the major thing, and also I think we have now shifted from the Karl Marx quote of from each according to its ability to each according to its needs. Now we have shifted to Saint Simonian's quote, from each according to its ability to each according to its works. So I think if they are capable, if they will upgrade themselves, then accordingly they will be reabsorbed. I think socio-economic justice, this is what it is all about. And rest is about the enforcement mechanism. Of course, I would like to say, like, let's see how the market forces, like how these inclined to shape the future of the labor laws. And all I can say is this, like the economies or the industries who are dwarfs, they will remain dwarfs only. And unlike babies, so economies, they will they will absorb more and more laborers. The baby economies, they are going to absorb more and more laborers, for that matter of fact. So I think everything is justified. Socio-economic justice is there, but challenges, we can address them. Okay. Over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Neeti Shikha, ma'am.
Thank you, Ishita. I think Anjali has really put the answers in context. Just before I begin with my answer, I'd like to just reflect back upon what Mr. Banerjee said. And he said that ease of doing business is not about labor rights, but rather ease of getting employment. But one has to be mindful that it is so interconnected, right? Because if you have, you'll be looked for, a company will look to employ, industry will look to employ only if the labor rights are not too stringent. So I think it's not right to say that they're not connected. In fact, there's a wonderful background paper by World Bank, if you read, and they actually go on to show that, how they why they think labor is a very important parameter. And somewhere it is not being taken as a 10 parameters, but if you read the report and if you look at the question, the World Bank survey that happened, which I also have filled twice last year and this last year, I filled these surveys. And I think it is very much, it is very much qualitatively put in the answers that you, when the survey is taken. So anyways, coming back to the question that you asked, that, what about social justice concerns of laborers? And I'm taking back to what Mr. Prashant Bhushan said, that of course, the first concern is, do they have a redressal mechanism? Do they have a place to voice their concerns? And as much as all of us, I mean, I'm a liberal thinker, but I still feel that one of the issues that has remained with us is that when we go to adopt a market-centric reforms, we sort of try to ignore the voices that need some help and, need some help to be heard. And it's a wonderful book I'm reminded of by Dr. Rajan, Saving Capitalism from Capitalists. So why I'm saying all this is because it's all in perspectives, because what India is trying to do with its labor laws or with the commercial laws, or with agricultural amendments, new agricultural law that's trying to bring in place, it is sort of trying to move towards the liberalism, a liberal reform and adopt liberal policies towards market and towards various laws that concerns market. Now, from that standpoint, I feel that concern that Mr. Bhushan has addressed is really critical. My answer probably to this would be that the question that we have to keep asking in our mind is that, is it the court the only savior of your rights today? Mr. Bhushan, you had a personal experience, and you would definitely, agree that we have our own doubts when it comes to approaching court, and especially for poor people who have no access to approaching courts. I mean, unless we have, big supporters of PIL and young, young students, lawyers who are ready to go to courts and represent them. I think somewhere we have, court justice system has not been able to reach to the last man in the country. Now, to that mind, the question is, then how do we deliver justice to that last man standing? My answer to that would be that probably you need to look at the parallel justice system. And when I say parallel justice system, I do not mean that you create alternate courts. Of course, there are labor courts already in place, but can other or alternate remedies, dispute remedies, be be applied or be tried in this arena as well? For example, could you talk about mediation? Could you talk about negotiation, and how you use these mediators and negotiators who could represent the rights of the workers, and negotiate on their behalf with industries that hire them? So I think that sort of alternate system that we need to be focused more, because we all know that if the cases go to court, it'll take much longer to get their rights, and by the time the justice would have really lost its meaning. So my answer to that would be that we have to look for an alternate method for social economic justice. There is one change that the court has brought in. Though flash strikes are permitted, but I think they have increased the number of notice period for strikes to 21 days. So I think, again, some sort of reflection. So it will help businesses, but then again, some workers may see this as a curtailment of their rights to strike. But I'm not sure how that would be balanced. I think industry experts like Mr. Banerjee, or even people from industry or from those experienced with labor unions, should have to come and tell them, what could be the way of balancing. But the good save is that flash strikes could be. But of course, government is not allowing strikes at a shorter notice, and somehow experience of strikes have not been very good. We have seen in, I won't name states, but in many parts of states, strikes have happened. You have literally made companies run away, and then after a few years, the government has really gone back to the same companies, approaching them to look at come and invest in that particular state. So I think it's very important that you start looking at the larger interest of people. Last but not the least, I think there will be a lot of discussion on the floor pricing, and people have critiqued it. That does it really work? Honestly, it's too early to predict, especially in India. India comes with its own cultural, experiences. So I'm not sure. I think something commenting on floor pricing would be like counting your chicken before they hatch. So, but I think what is need is some sort of behavioral change, both in the industry, in the minds of the industries that hire them and the workers. And just the last point on the contract workers that Mr. Bhushan raised, I think it is something. It's a point that, of course, that worries a lot many people. Uh, but I think the answer would be how you could reconcile the inclusion of contract workers and allowing companies to have contract labor forces as against perennial forces. If you could ensure that the benefits that you've envisaged within the code could be extended to contract workers, which I'm the plain reading of the code, it does suggest then I think there should be not a problem, because the contract gives a lot of flexibility for the labor forces also to move around, and so does it give the flexibility to the industries to meet its own supply and demand. So I think even that concern would be answered if you could ensure that the benefits that you would like to give it to regular workers also is extended to contract workers. Sadly, Ishita, right now, I know multiple companies and multiple institutions outside the labor force domain, but they are more they're more incentivized to keep people on contract because many benefits do not pass on to them, and it includes many institutions that work within the government umbrella, and they keep people on contract. Companies have denied. There's a famous case you must have read, which sort of triggered the labor reforms, where a labor was was asked to leave asked to leave his work because he's sleeping on the floor. There are multiple cases you'll find that where a pregnant woman has not been given maternity benefits, and I'm approached by many startups saying that when COVID started, uh, many startups came and said that they would like to terminate an employee because she's just got into her family way, and they would have to pay her the maternity benefits. So what I'm trying to say is that contractual workers really are at mercy of the goodwill of the company, and that somehow has to be reconciled. And we need to ensure that how the benefits of these legislations are also extended to them. Yeah, that will be my long answer to your short question. Yeah.
Mr. Prashant, sir, so what would be your input with regard to this question? And since Niti Shikha raised this point about labor legislation, so there's also a question in the chat box by Advocate Kumar Vaibhav, who's stated that the primary issue in labor legislation is the time factor, because initially it takes years in labor court or industrial tribunals, then challenged before the High Court and thereafter Supreme Court. So the time factor is really a major concern for the labor. So, sir, any input on this?
Yes, to my mind, this is the most critical problem because you see, there is no point in creating any labor rights unless you have an effective mechanism for redressing those rights. And today, unfortunately, the existing courts or the existing redressal system is itself failed. And we had to correct that. And instead of correcting that, we have gone the other way of further reducing it so that you now do not even have labor courts at the district level. You have some tribunals only at the state level, which will be much more difficult for the labor to approach. So, you see, I know that the present court system is more or less dysfunctional. Even the general court system is dysfunctional, and very few people are able to get effective justice through this system. And one of the major problems is that the poor people cannot even access the courts because they do not have money to pay lawyers. So we needed to set up some kind of system which could be accessed without the use of lawyers. The Gram Nyayalayas were supposed to be these kind of simplified courts where CPC, CRPC would not be strictly applied, which were for normal, simple cases where people could approach without lawyers. There was no reason why such kind of simplified courts should not have been set up as labor courts. More courts, simplified courts, so that the labor could approach those courts without the help of lawyers. But far from doing that, we have made it even more difficult. So that's a very, very serious problem with the present system. The other thing that Mr. Banerjee mentioned was that he said that the ease of doing business means uh, that the labor should get employment. I agree with that to a very large extent. Of course, it should not mean that labor should be exploited. Today, unfortunately, in India, the inequality index is so high, it's about the highest in the world, and capital is in the hands of very few people, with the result that you have only a few people with that capital to provide the employment, and you have a very large, huge labor force vying for that employment. Now, this situation is tailor-made for exploitation of the people. We have been saying for a long time that employment, since the Supreme Court has held that the right to life includes the right to live with dignity, therefore, at least employment at minimum wages for at least half the year should be a fundamental right of every citizen in this country. So a NREGA type of law should be extended to every adult in the country, where every adult is entitled to employment at minimum wages for at least 180 days in a year. Then these people, then our labor force would be in a slightly better bargaining position with these few large employers who have the access to that capital. Of course, we need to reduce inequality in our society in order to have a fairer system. But even in the absence of that, we need to give them at least this minimal employment in order to place them in a slightly better bargaining position. So that's my view about this. Thank you.
Mr. Robin, sir, as someone in the industry, how has been your experience with trade unions, and what is your opinion on this apprehension that trade unions have against liberalization?
Thank you. There are very important comments made. I'll come to the trade union and how they behave or what the implications are. I think I have responsibility to explain to Dr. Shikha that what I had mentioned. We are discussing today, ladies and gentlemen, I view, is EODB and labor right. This is what we are discussing, labor right and EODB, the relationship thereof. And my view is that enhancing EODB, which is ease of doing business, will enhance labor rights. And I think labor rights have three legs to stand on. One leg is employment, getting an opportunity to work. The second leg is fair remuneration, wages. You remember wages for labor? And the third leg is safety and safe environment. Safety means I don't get killed, I don't get hurt. An environment which is clean and neat, and so that a human being can work and not dogs and cats are working. EODB helps the number one issue, which is employability. More businesses coming in makes more employable. Mr. Bhushan did mention that everyone should have the right to have an employment of 180 days, but that's not the job of industry. That's not the job. That's the job of a government. So when we talk about labor rights or labor law, by encouraging industries to come in, services to come in, logistics to come in, various other production or manufacturing to come in, we are enhancing the possibility of employment. And more it happens, the quality of labor also has to go up, because after all, it is demand and supply. Minimum wages, sir, I am not, you people are experts, I am not, but I understand whatever I have heard and seen in the four codes. I think 18,000 rupees has been kept to the threshold, and plus, but the rules have not been made as yet. I think it is subject to discussions, and various states can have different, but 18,000 is a fair, I think it's a fair benchmark. Today, if I know approximately, let's say 15 to 16,500 rupees, in some places even 8,000 rupees. So 18,000 is a fair benchmark. But having said that, I think the question which was asked by Ishita was, what about trade unions? Why they are unhappy? Or trade unions are unhappy because, to my mind too, and as Dr. Shikha rightly mentioned, the 300 benchmark, and I think Anjali also mentioned, they don't like any benchmark. They want everybody to be unionized. Now, 300 is a large benchmark for them because a lot of SMEs will move out. Maybe 80% of SME sectors will move out of this 300 benchmark. Number two, because there is fixed contract concept, which is hire and fire, labor union does not like it. I have a fixed term contract, 1 year, 2 years, and after 2 years, I'm gone. And moment I'm there for 2 years, can I form a union? Perhaps not, because I'm not interested. I want to save my labor, my job, and move forward. So obviously trade unions are not happy. The most important is trade unions should understand that any ecosystem which is created to add employment must be encouraged by the union. We are the union. Who is union? The people of India are union. If we can encourage better business, better ecosystem, better employability, our per capita income will go up and all of us will become happy. I think we are moving in the right direction.
Thank you so much, sir. So nextly, I'd like to move on to the pandemic and its impact on the laborers in India. And in this regard, I'd specifically like the speakers to address the relaxation of labor laws that several states have carried out. And specifically, Uttar Pradesh has passed this specific ordinance for temporary exemption from certain labor laws. So how do you think laborers are to be affected with regard to the economic decline and this relaxation of labor laws that has been carried out by several states? Anjali ma'am?
See, it's just not the Uttar Pradesh, even the Gujarat government or Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan. There are many states which have passed various laws in relation to COVID reliefs, right? And all the like labor exemptions have been made in relation to three factors mainly. Mainly, it is in firstly is like reduction in the number of daily work hours. Second is like weekly work hours reduction, and also the overtime payment of wages. So all the rules, they have been relaxed by the government. Though the like relaxation of rules, this particular regime, it is vested in the labor laws thing. But now because of the pandemic, government has taken this thing. So what I feel is this, like UP, it has withdrawn the particular notification for the because of the stringent hostilities that it received from the state. Also, like the Gujarat government, the notification is also struck down by the Supreme Court, stating that this is not a public emergency. You cannot consider this as a public emergency, which is mentioned in the Labor Laws Act, which I find, this justification is very reasonable, that you cannot allow this pandemic to overlap the rights of the laborers and the workers. And that is why this particular this particular explanation, it has been outrightly rejected by the Supreme Court, and I perfectly agree to it. Like I really like the bold move that the courts have taken to protect the rights of the workers and given justice to them. Also, like, but yeah, definitely their rights could have been protected in a better manner if we could have given them, like, that's my personal view, we could have given them some unemployment allowances or some insurance programs, so that vulnerable sections of the workers, they're protected. Like, we should have something done better to consider the interest of all the stakeholders. That's all.
Thank you, ma'am. Nitishika ma'am, any input on the subject? And also, I'd like to now request the speakers to stick to 2 minutes for an answer due to paucity of time.
Yeah.
So, ma'am, please.
So Sushita, good for reminding me. I'll keep my answer very brief. I think Anjali has really mentioned it right, that it's had a limited application, but I think I'll not reiterate what Anjali has already said. I think my limited submission to this would be that COVID is very testing times, and what has really saddened me is the way the state bodies have exercised their power during these times. Why I'm saying so is that at one point you heard that government wanted private contracts to write off the interest on loans. Thank God, some there was interjection by the court and said that you could not do that. So I think the state was trying to really move towards a very, a very pro-people, pro-populist measures in some space, in some areas, and in other areas, it moved towards, protecting the industry. And I think there's a lot of confusion and conundrum within the government itself as to who to protect. I think my answer to this question would be, leave it to the market industry to decide, for simple reason. You cannot force industry that does not have money to run business to keep paying people. I mean, these are times not only which is hard for labor, but also for industry. I totally empathize with labor forces. In fact, I was so saddened, I stay at a place where I could see thousands of migrant workers right in front of a house walking down. So I think the execution was definitely faulty. The way we announced lockdown and people started running towards their house. But that's a separate issue. The issue of forcing industries to retain laborers, I think that is something that that is not really the job of states. I mean, look at the kind of packages that's come for the MSMEs in MSME sector. I mean, you want them to take loan from you and pay back over years, but you want them to keep paying for the laborers without the work or production being there. So I think, thankfully, what we have done is we started opening up slowly, and I think we should not hasten into making such legislation, bringing in such ordinances during testing times. And it has affected business as much as it affected labor. And though I'm all for labor, labor protection, labor rights, but I feel one has to be very mindful that these are not all companies are cronies sitting a lot of money who can really afford to keep laborers being paid during testing times. And here, I think the role of government steps in, as as I think Mr. Robin just pointed a few minutes back. In such testing times, it is the government who should intervene. It's a well-settled principle that market forces collapses, is the government should come with a policy to really curtail the problem that we're looking at. So government should have stepped in, found a way to pay off these laborers during testing times. PM CARE Fund has a lot of money, and I'm told that in UP they did do so, and we must appreciate the UP government for that, because they started helping those needies and poors by giving grains and so on and so forth. So I think that was better move than rather asking industry, being a parentis parenti. It's the state that has to do that act, not the industry. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Prashant, sir, any input on this relaxation of labor laws by several states?
No, firstly, labor laws should not be relaxed through ordinances. If at all, they need to be relaxed through regular amendment in the law. Ordinance was not the right way of doing it, and the Supreme Court rightly struck down the Gujarat ordinance on this issue. The second thing is that, you see, with this kind of lockdown, which effectively prevented industries from working and labor from getting any work, it was really the job of the government to step in and provide some relief to these workers and to the industry, etc. To expect labor to fend for themselves, or even to expect industry which has been shut down due to the lockdown to pay the labor time. I mean, obviously some industry can do that, but a lot of them, especially the small industries and the small employers, would not be able to do that. So therefore, it was the job of the government to step in with a relief package for all these workers, which would have benefited the industry also, which would have benefited the economy in general. All economists were saying that you need some direct cash transfers to these workers who have lost their jobs, etc. But unfortunately, the government did not do that. So I feel that was what was required. Thank you.
Robin, sir, there's also a question for you in the chat box by Advocate Swati. So are these ease of doing business rankings highly superficial, and are they actual indicators of ease of carrying out business, especially considering that they cover only limited aspects of a business, and also considering the vast diversity and territorial differences in a country like India?
Yes, I will answer this. I will then answer this one. EODB ranks 190 countries. Ease of doing business ranks 190 countries. And the World Bank have figured out there are 10 parameters on which this ranking has to be done. And one of the parameters is how fast you can get a permission to build a construction site, contract execution, settlement, taxation amongst the various countries, so on and so forth. So there are now. Please understand, 190 countries. How will they measure? So in India, they only measure two cities, Mumbai and Delhi. That's all. World Bank does the survey only in Mumbai and Delhi. So whatever you see, the ranking of 63 from whatever we were 160 earlier, it's only on two cities and also on 10 parameters. These parameters, in their judgment, they said that if these parameters are easy, you encourage businesses to start and continue unhindered. That's it. And labor is not one of that. So yes, if you look at deeply, it is little superficial. But for your information, the DIPB, Department of DIPB of India and Government of India, also has within the states a competition, and that is on 330 criteria. So that's, and you will sometimes find that Gujarat is 12 and Bihar is 13 or West Bengal is 11 or whatever. Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, in fact, is number 1, just for information. That is another among the states that DIPP has started so that there is competition among the states to do ease of doing business. Because of that, Uttar Pradesh had kept the Factories Act and the Industrial Dispute Act in abeyance. Then once Uttar Pradesh did it, Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh followed. Thankfully, the Supreme Court has of course struck it down and kept that also in abeyance. But in the meantime, the 4 labor codes have also come in. To cut the long story short, EODB is not an ingrained situation. It is a superficial, but it gives the comparison of 190 countries in the world as to where should an investment go when an industrialist have a choice of 190 countries to invest in.
Ishita, if I can just give my 2 cents on that.
Yes,
Mr. Robin, I think it was in 2017 that I did a academic research paper, and I found the methodology very flawed. And my argument in the paper was that EODB is firstly, as you rightly mentioned, it only studies Mumbai and Delhi. It totally discounts the inequalities that exist within the state in India. So is India a favorable destination for commerce just because Mumbai and Delhi, which is heavily loaded industry, exists? Or do we also look at Gujarat? Do you also look at Orissa and other Tamil Nadu and other states? So it does not measure the inequalities within the state. And thanks to Niti Aayog, which gave a very good vision paper on competitive federalism. And they said that why don't we states start competing with each other to improve the ease of doing business within the states. So firstly that, and secondly, if you look at the questions, the survey questions, they're very perceptive, Ishita. They ask an investor, how would you like to invest in this? What are your perceptions about this? So I think that perceptive questions also have to be backed by data. So of course, one has to find merit in that because these are only a group of people who have been who are into business answering those questions. But these questions are sort of perceptive, and I think
Subjective.
the right measure, and perceptive. I mean, I'm not at liberty to share some questions with you, but these are like, they give you a hypothetical situation and they ask you to answer this hypothetical situation. So I think again, the devil will lie in details as to how they make sure that the answers are given are not biased answers, and their answers, whether they are not biased answers. In fact, this was the criticism raised by multiple countries, because of which this time I think ease of doing business ranking was suspended. So I think, and why it is important in case of labor force especially, because if you see, the most of the labor forces are not are coming from these tier 3 cities, right? And so within India, you have such a high rate of inequality. We have Bimadu states as one side, which is the states that are providing the maximum labor to various parts of India. But within the state, there's a lot of inequality. Which state has better protection for laborers? I mean, one study should be done within India is that within the states, which state gives better protection for laborers? Which state is more competitive for labor forces. So, if that kind of, ranking is floated out, then probably states would, will be more incentivized to improve their own labor ecosystem. I mean, look at Bihar. It has land, it has natural resources, it has cheap labor, and still people of Bihar would migrate from the state to work in distant states like Kerala. So one has to also look into these nuances if we really want India to be, India to do well, and industries adding to the growth story of India. I mean, these things cannot be discounted or cannot be ignored. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And I hate to cut the speakers, however, we are very restricted by time here. So I thank all the speakers for this enlightening session and for providing us with such valuable insights on the subject. And I also thank our sponsors, Vithi.org, India School of Law, Policy and Governance, Arnes, and all our media partners for associating with us. And finally, I thank the audience for for joining us for this wonderful session today. We will now take a short break for 5 to 10 minutes before moving on to the next session, Legal Framework for Cyber Crimes in India and Beyond, which will be moderated by my fellow Law Vice Curator, Nitish Mahajan. Thank you, sir and ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Shita. Thank you, everyone.